Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about prejudice, racism, and intolerance and all that stuff. Uh, let's get started. Racism, I really should say prejudice. Prejudice has been around for a long time. Since there have been humans, there has been prejudice. It exists in every corner of the world. It has been here long before we were born and will be here long after we're dead. And prejudice can take many forms: racism, sexism, homophobia, dislike of certain religions, national origin. The list goes on and on and on. But the reality is that sometimes it can be very overt, like a Ku Klux Klanman burning a cross or something like that. But it can also be very subtle. For example, I remember reading the book Lord of the Flies. And in that book, towards the end, all the kids are acting like savages, of course, and going ape shit like a bunch of tribal ninnies. And what happened is that there's this Royal Navy officer who comes in and sees the kids acting all primitive. And he's kind of like, I expected a better show from British lads, or boys, or whatever. But anyway, do you think he would have acted that way if those children in question had not been white? Maybe if they'd been Pacific Islander or African? No. He probably would have just thought to himself, oh yeah, that's the way they act. That's the way they're expected to act. See, it's subtle things like that that makes racism work. Another thing is some forms of prejudice are more acceptable than others. Like, for example, a white guy who says nigger. It's like the whole world will go insane, but a black person can say honky or something like that and nothing will happen to him, or even, chink or whatever. And what it is that I have been on the receiving end of prejudice before, and I have even dished it out. I admit it, I'm being honest here. I'm not going to lie. But it's like, okay, believe it or not, I haven't just been called nasty names. I've been beat up for being a faggot, even though I'm not gay. And it's just, I don't know. People often act like, being white or a white heterosexual cisgender male is going to keep you safe from prejudice. It won't. It's not a privileged class like a lot of people think it is. And that brings up another thing. You see, remember what I said earlier about Lord of the Flies? It's like German war crimes in World War II, they get a lot of attention. Yet the Soviet war crimes are all but forgotten, as are the Japanese. At least in the Western, as are the Japanese, even more so in the Western world, at least in the Western world. But people have this racist view that, I guess white people, Europeans, white Americans, are supposed to be so civilized, and, Africans, Asians, and all that shit, they're supposed to be savages. And it's very subconscious, but it's there. And I'm not gonna give you some bullshit. Are there racist people in this country? Oh, hell yes. Are there racist politicians? Sure. But people often trivialize racism. I have had, there was this one gay black guy who came on to me, and I told him no. I'm not interested. I'm straight. And what did he say? He didn't say typical homosexual. He was like, typical white boy. And Ashley Shackelford talking all that shit in front of a bunch of white people to their faces, and they were just like, right? If a white person had tried to give a similar speech, they probably would have gotten their ass beat. But that being said, is you know, trivializing the word. It desensitizes people, so when you yell racism, it doesn't have the same impact because it's overused. And prejudice will continue to exist because it's like we say we don't allow, smokers in here, we won't hire felons. These are all forms of prejudice, and sometimes, and prejudice, unfortunately, is a survival mechanism. It's it's ingrained into us. Like, for example, it's kept our species alive for a million years. I mean, it's like if your mother got killed by lions, you're not going to like lions. If you got your hand stuck on some thorns when you were a kid and you nearly died from an infection, you're not going to like the thorns. You're not going to want to deal with the thorns again. As I said, prejudice is an instinct. It kept our species alive for millions and millions of years. And that's the survival instinct we inherited. Granted, we are living in the space age, and yet we still have hunter-gatherer brains. The world has advanced more in the past 100 years or 200 years than it has in the 10,000 before that. And I mean, you can look at it now. Think back to 10 years ago. The world was a completely different place. And somebody 1,000 years ago, they wouldn't have noticed a real change in the world from the beginning to the end of their life. Even if they lived, anywhere from 50 to 80 years, they wouldn't notice too big a difference in lifestyle. Now they would. Hell, it's like I noticed a big change from 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. The world is completely different. And it's going to keep changing and changing. It's not slowing down. And when it comes to dealing with racism and how to combat it, that's a long and complicated topic. But I like Daryl Davis's approach the best. That man, if you don't know who he is, type in his name into YouTube or the internet and check out his documentary Accidental Courtesy. It's on Netflix as of right now. That could change if you're watching this a year or two from now, but it's on right now. Anyway, he's a black man who goes around talking with white supremacists a lot of the times. And he's gotten a lot of them to change their views through their friendship with him. And it's simply amazing what he does. I have nothing but respect for that man. In fact, I think he should be Secretary of State. And what we see here is that the dynamics of prejudice, it just doesn't come out of thin air. They are that way for a reason. They could have been taught that way. They could have learned that behavior. They could have some resentment. They could have their own personal issues. They may be just acting like that to fit in. And as far as prejudice in my personal life, I've been called nasty names, like, faggot and honky and shit like that. And I do admit that sometimes, not all the time, but a few times, I've had black people treat me like I owe them something, like I own slaves or something like that, and that I owe them compensation for what people that look like me did to people that look like them, hundreds of years ago. And pretty much everybody was alive today was born well after the people who were alive during slavery died. And I never knew a slaveholder. Well, he may have like a harem full of kidnapped sex slaves, but I never knowingly knew a slaveholder. Except in maybe the BDSM community, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, what it is. And I will be frank here. I've been back, if you're, black or Latino or Asian or whatever, I've been backstage with white people. And they often do say racist things behind closed doors in private conversations. I'll admit that. And, they might say it in anger or something like that, but, I believe that, there's borderline racists and actual racists. And, what we have here is, Ice Cube wrote a song way back when. I think it was called Cave Bitch or something like that. It basically openly mocks white women. Now, I don't think that a song like that would have been tolerated if a white artist had directed it at black women. I do not think that would go over well. I know, certain songs like Fuck the Police and Cop Killer really caused quite a stir. And that's another form of prejudice. But, it's art. And it may want to send a message. Art is often used to send messages, but it's still art. And, there are just so many things, that go into this. Because prejudice is ingrained in all of us, whether you want to know it, whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. You can be subconscious. You can have it within your subconscious. And to dive deep into it, I don't have all the solutions for combating racism. I don't think anyone ever does. But what I think the closest thing we could do is get people to travel more. Because as Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. And I absolutely agree with that. I've done a lot of traveling and learned a lot from it. It's a great way to educate yourself. If you can travel, by all means, do so. Please, you'll be glad you did. And I guess that will conclude my video. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And if you can, leave a donation. It's for a good cause. Till next time.